Today I'll be talking a little bit about AI and our brain, how artificial intelligence as we know it, they came into being, and a little bit of backstory behind it. So I'll be covering three topics, the history of neural networks and artificial intelligence, and we'll compare the von Neumann architecture, brain, how it actually works. And then I will do a little bit of a demo of how we should evaluate the outcome of generative AI today. So, well, I'll begin with the historical roots. And then I will show a little bit of comparison around different architectures, and then we'll see how this artificial intelligence, the generative models, they will need a different thinking paradigm to make it useful. So, before we begin, this graph on the right is a comparison of the actual biological neuron and artificial neuron as we know it. So you can see on the artificial neuron, Michael Capet, they developed this demonstration of the input and threshold output based on the understanding of biological neurons back in 1940s. So not surprisingly, actually, around the same time, von Neumann actually started building his understanding and develop this software architecture, which laid the ground for the modern day computer. So I would say similar to how, okay, I would assume most of you may have some experience with the machine learning as of today. And you would know that the artificial neurons, basically we have a threshold machine. When we see the signal, if it passes a certain threshold, we will generate an output. And biological neurons actually does the same thing. So when we hear a voice and we see something, there will be an electric pulse sent through your neurons. And if it reaches a certain action threshold, it's gonna trigger it to release some chemicals in the brain, and you're gonna see all the things happen through the brain. So very similar in terms of the architectures. And this is actually the first artificial neural network. It was built in the 1950s by Marvin Minsky. It's called SNARC, which is a stochastic neural analog reinforcement calculator. A little bit lengthy. But you can see this was, okay. But you can see this was actually, okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this machine actually used around like I think 40 artificial neurons to simulate a rat navigating a maze. So this is what we were able to do in the 1950s. And then following this, there were development of the perceptrons or different deep learning perceptrons, and then those probably developed by John Hopfield later in the years. And those laid the ground foundation work actually to the modern understanding of machine learning, or what as we call it, deep learning. So I have a quick video from 1961. This is 64 years ago. And before my parents were born, actually, and that features famous folks like Carl Shannon, who was the father of information theory, and all of this stuff actually lies in the heart of modern artificial intelligence. Let's take a look what they were saying, 64 years ago.
A thinking machine. Hello again. With me tonight is Professor Jerome B. Wiesner, Director of the Research Laboratory of Electronics at MIT. Dr. Wiesner, what really worries me today is what's going to happen to us if machines can't think. And what interests me specifically is, can they? Well, that's a very hard question to answer. If you'd asked me that question just a few years ago, I'd have said it was very far-fetched. Today, I just have to admit I don't really know. I suspect if you come back in 4 or 5 years, I'll say, sure, they really do think. Well, if you're confused, Doctor, how do you think I feel?
We're just really beginning to understand the capabilities of the computers. I've got some film to illustrate this point, which I think will amaze you.
That man isn't playing checkers against the computer, is he?
Sure, and it plays pretty well.
Now, which color?
While most computer scientists saw it as a mere number cruncher, a small group thought that the digital computer had a much grander destiny. Being a general-purpose machine, it could be programmed to do things which in humans require intelligence, play games like checkers and chess, and solve brain teasers.
Let's see what it's printing out.
The field became known as artificial intelligence.
Can machines really think? Even the scientists argue that one.
I'm convinced that machines can and will think. I don't mean that machines will behave like men. I don't think for a very long time we're going to have a difficult problem distinguishing a man from a robot. And I don't think my daughter will ever marry a computer. But I think the computers will be doing the things that men do when we say they're thinking. I'm convinced that machines can and will think in our lifetime.
I confidently expect that within a matter of 10 or 15 years, something will emerge from the laboratories which is not too far from the robot of science fiction fame.
They hadn't reckoned with ambiguity when they set out to use computers to translate languages.
A $500,000 supercalculator, the most versatile electronic brain known, translates Russian into English. Instead of mathematical wizardry, a sentence in Russian is to be said in...
One of the first non-numerical applications of computers, it was hyped as the solution to the Cold War obsession of keeping tabs on what the Russians were doing. Claims were made that the computer would replace most human translators.
President, of course, you're just in the experimental stage. When you go in for full-scale production, what will the capacity be?
We should be able to do about, with a modern commercial computer, about 1 to 2 million words an hour. And this would be quite an adequate speed to cope with the whole output of the Soviet Union in just a few hours computer time a week.
When do you hope to be able to achieve the speed?
If our experiments go well, then perhaps within 5 years or so.
And finally, Mr. McDaniel, does this mean the end of human translators?
So yes for translators of scientific and technical material, but as regards poetry and novels, no, I don't think we'll ever replace the translators of that type of material.
Mr. McDaniel, thank you very much.
All right, thank you all for watching. I believe this video will bring a lot of sparks in your mind as you think about what generative models can do today, what ChatGPT can do, and how we are phrasing it in terms of the new reasoning models, right? How it is actually thinking similar to how we do. And note that this video clip was from 1961. So 64 years ago, they were already doing this. And the hope was that they were able to see something that are able to think like us in the next 10 to 15 years. Well, it didn't take that short, but today, right now, I would say we are here. Oh, sorry. So, next I'm going to give you a little bit of comparison across different architectures that we see in the classic computational system, classic computers we see, and our brain, and then the neural networks. So you can see on the leftmost, there is the von Neumann architecture. This is what laid the foundation of the modern day computer science. I think this was first published in 1945, I believe. And then I think the first later on was around 1960s. I believe that the Marvin Minsky and the folks developed the concept of perceptrons, which actually harness the power of this architecture to be able actually to provide this artificial neuron. So in the middle, we can see there is the human brain. And the von Neumann architecture claims that we have this analog digital inputs, we have the outputs, we have a CPU, central processing unit, and then we have a memory attached to it. So we pull information from memory, process that, we generate output. Well, I guess in our human brains, you will probably know that we don't have sort of like a disk attached things, right? We have our single brain there. But the reality is, in our brain, there are brain regions that are actually in charge of memories, hippocampus, these areas, and there are series that these memories are not stored in a single location, but rather stored in distribution of networks within the brain. So this is actually an area that has been studied a lot over the past several decades and is still ongoing, honestly. So, and sorry. So in 1980s, John Hopfield, the professor who actually won a Nobel Prize last year and got all the attention, proposed the Hopfield network. And this was the energy-based models mimicking the brain's associated memory. And then the human memory is very complicated. So we don't just go a single direction, right? What we see will actually trigger our memories, and then we can down-regulate what we remember. So it's a bidirectional process, and this is actually integrated into the modern neural networks. So we call it backpropagation RNN recurrent networks. The idea of these are similar, and it is to simulate how we human actually process memories. And of course, up to this day, this is still a very simplistic representation of how our memory actually works. And I won't go into details today, but there are lots of frontier research working on how to enhance the memories of large language models. And there are different trajectories. I think one of them is to exploring the direction of episodic memories to burn them into the large language models. But at any rate, the origin of the entire artificial intelligence is based on our understanding of the biological brain. So this graph on the left is a picture or pictorial representation of our visual pathway. What you can see here is, well, this is demons, of course, for humor, I think. But what really happens here is when we see a letter A, and this letter A is passed onto the first onto it says image demons, but really it's passed into our eyes. We see the lighter, we extract its features, the edges, the angles, and the horizontal bars. We see all these components of A, and this is the second different features. And now in our brain, we'll have this, we're pulling the patterns information from our memory to see what exactly this is, right? Like in the middle, we can see this matches, probably matches an R, probably matches a 4, is a M or B. And of course, A has the most, well, I would say highest probability of being correct. And that's why it's actually provided, or we will say, okay, this is A. And of course, there are other psychological, I would say, neurological disease that will actually interfere with this process, and some people cannot actually tell the letter accurately, and that is that functional process within the different steps in terms of processing. So the origin of this visual pathway was discovered by Huber and Wiesel, and what they did was they tried to understand the visual pathway. I'm not sure if you can. Sorry, what is this? Okay, can anyone see the video or seeing still the slides? Okay, can we see the video? Okay, awesome. So I'll be working over this.
As they presented it with different visual images.
So
When we started working,
extract
Kristen and I, in the late 50s,
our visual
we set up our first experiments, and they didn't go well because
at the beginning, we couldn't make the salts fire at all. We'd shine lights all over the screen and nothing seemed to work. And rather by accident, one day, we were shining small spots, either white spots or black spots, onto the screen. And we found that the black dot seemed to be working in a way that at first we couldn't understand until we found that it was the process of slipping the piece of glass into the projector, which swept a line, a very faint, precise, narrow line across the retina. And every time we did that, we'd get a response.
Okay. So we'll probably see that. And the reason that actually work is because our visual pathway, our neurons actually will detect the edges of the image we see. And as that glass being slipped into the field of the cat, it actually triggers the neuron to fire. So let's see, I actually did a little experiment actually, and I asked AI, ChatGPT latest model, 03 to actually provide me with a description or comparison of the transformer and with our human attention system. The thing is that this information is not accurate, and it sounds like very convincing when you see it, but it's actually not correct. So the right part are things where they're wrong. So, okay, I'm not familiar with if you know what softmax is. If you know what softmax is, you can comment in the chat. I say plus S. Okay, so softmax is actually a function we use that will, let's say, take a bunch of values to normalize them, and then we will assign roughly probability distribution for the entire value array. So, okay, the AI said it's looking everywhere and then scale for transformer, but we don't really scale that. We actually normalize that. Okay, so the second part is that I'm pretty sure you probably have heard about the concept that artificial intelligence, the generative models are so energy inefficient, and our human brain is so energy efficient, right? And actually, I think I remember electricity has become one of the biggest blockers in adopting in training more powerful models and serving this to people around the world. Our brain, on the contrary, actually consumes a tiny amount of energy compared to the machine learning models. Well, it's not 12 watts here. It's actually 20. That's why this factory information is here. If you are using this yourself, I'm pretty sure you are today, then you need to be extra careful when taking this information that are being provided to you from the AI models. And the second part is, so when we see human brains are very dynamic, and within our brains, we have oscillations, we have neuron signals going on all the time. And as I mentioned earlier, our memory system is also very complex. So we have different long-term, short-term memories, and specifically you have something called working memory. What this means is that it's a very short duration and low capacity memory that it will hold around 7 ± 2 items in your brain. So when you remember a phone number, for example, you can remember that. And this lasts only for a short duration. Here it says seconds, but actually it's a little bit longer. I'm gonna show the correct data here. So yeah. So the actual duration of working memory is around 15 to 30 seconds. So if I type anything in the chat, let's say a random number, and if you look at it, and then 30 seconds later, I can ask you to reset it back to me. Of course, in the chat, this will be a little bit less of a good experiment because we can see what's going on there. But You can try to remember these, just look at once, remember it, and then see if you can reset it a little bit later. Nonetheless, the transformer architecture is what actually leads the fair for this new generative model huge trend that we are seeing today. And it's actually an attempt to replicate the attention system of human brain. And that's a very clever effort, I would say, that then. So at the end, I will show you a bit of a trick we see in terms of attention regulation in human brain and how we actually use that, in our day-to-day life. So now, I probably already see the the mistakes AI made, and as powerful as these generative models are, they are not that robust. They are not that reliable. They just hallucinate sometimes, right? And if we take everything in as it tells us, we'll be probably in serious trouble. And with the emergence of this new trend of agentic AI, it's actually becoming even more difficult to evaluate the outputs of AIs and models to make sure that it actually behaves in the way we want it to be and provides us with quality responses. So in traditional supervised AI, it's actually simpler to evaluate, because we will have this finite space of answer, right? Whether a single class classification, we have yes or no, we have labeling, we have multi-class labels, right? We can project this to us continuous values, right? We use regression. They can predict, for example, the house prices, the probability of something happens, and we can generate like short sequences from a small vocabularies. But majority of these are share an exhaustive, innumerable output space and a single ground truth label, for example. So you can calculate things like accuracy. I think F1 here is a bit complex, but really the concept is quite simple. It's just how many predictions you made are correct. If I have 100 samples, for example, I know 50 of them are of label A, 50 of them are of label B. Or let's just say we have, let's say 50 animals, right? We know 50 of them are cat, 50 of them are rat. And then we will train the model to say how many of them are cat, right? And if we say 35, then we know that 35, we need to see two things. One, how many rats were classified as cat, and how many cats were actually classified as cat, right? That's the accuracy you're talking about. So this is a finite problem space. But now with these whole generative models, the foundational models we see, it's a whole different story. Like you can use it to generate poetry, you can use it to generate novels, art, and you can use it to generate images and audios and all kinds of things. And how can you effectively evaluate its correctness? And more specifically, probably we have seen before, right? Our brain is probabilistic, and the whole generative models are probabilistic. So the output is not guaranteed to be exactly the same all the time. So there are ways that we can tune the randomness of the output. It's called temperature in practice. It basically just decides how random we want the output to be. We can set it to 0, but in practice, it's hard to see that in production systems. That means if you give the same prompt to ChatGPT, you might see different answers, right? And this makes it a little bit harder to evaluate the outputs of this large language model. And we still need to figure out a way of different criteria, right? So, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we can see in the previous slide, some information facts were basically just outright wrong. So we need to check its factuality. Is this correct? Is it true? And then it is accurately telling us that it doesn't know, it has no idea what it doesn't know. And sometimes this can be tuned from prompt, You can ask it to generate answers with high confidence. The problem is that not all the users actually knows how to do it. And the more users, the less users know how to do it, the more error prone they are to the mistakes of the models. And then we have the concerns of fairness, safety, and then we have this concept called alignment that basically makes sure that the models are actually spewing all these harmless, bias-free answers, right? And it actually knows when to stop, when to say that, hey, this question is out of bounds. I cannot help with that. I gotta stop. And then there are different ways to think about to evaluate the model, to use models actually. And I think in the previous workshops, you probably already know that there are different types of large language models. There are the reasoning models, there are non-reasoning models, and there's different modalities, text, videos. So one question needs to be answered is whether this model we are using actually fits our task. For example, we can use very powerful reasoning models like O1 Pro for all the tasks, all the time, but that will take first too long, second too expensive. So we need to figure out a balance, right, between when we use like a simpler model to generate an output fast but with high accuracy, compared with one model to really think through its response and get the correct output. And robustness is there in production systems, there are different ways we need to handle this the input. So people will be malicious. They want to harness the models to generate incorrect outputs. They want to jailbreak the models specifically, and the system needs to block that. And we need to evaluate if the system can block that. And this is all different sorts of challenges that we encounter in everyday production system. So yeah, if you have any experience yourself, feel free to comment in the chat. Take a look. And I want to show one interesting benchmark that has been used to evaluate different models. It's called MC Bench, and it actually uses a Minecraft concept to evaluate different programming models. I think this was developed by high school students. So as you can see, technically this is not too complicated. This is actually a very simple, actually not very simple, but it's actually a simple implementation. And if you're interested, you can probably hack this out through this hackathon event. But what this says is that it's giving a prompt to different models, and the different models will try to generate generate some I would say representation of it in the Minecraft using whatever is available. So let's take a look at this one. It says, with a massive clock surface with intricate gears and numerals capturing the abstract essence of time. This is a very complex task. Yeah, but the thing on the left, I'm not sure that's a clock. Yeah, I'm gonna vote B here, or someone might think A is better, but let's just say. So on the left is Common Plus, and on the right is Grok 2. A very interesting comparison. Let's see what's next. So it has construct a floating island entirely made of candy. Huh. Okay. Complete with chocolate waterfalls and candy cane trees. I think, yeah, I would say the one on the right is actually, looks more like candy, has chocolate waterfalls. So let's see what model on the right is. Ultra mini high. Okay. Yeah, so you can see this sort of benchmark is one way of evaluating the performance of production system, because I think in reality, there are so many companies producing these models, and as users, we need a way to effectively evaluate like how accurate, how robust, how powerful are these models, and how can we use them ourselves. And this system benchmark like this is actually a very simple way to visualize the outcome. It has a leaderboard. Let's see, Optimus Alpha 4.1. So this is sort of a very interesting concept you can develop yourself with the help of cloud, Lovable, and other platform systems. Now, back to the practice. So that was an oversimplification of what you might see in evaluation systems, but in a production environment, what we actually deal with, like Google or in other large tech companies, or other small medium companies, is actually a very complicated hierarchy of flows, right? I won't. Okay, I think 34 minutes. So I won't go too much in details into this hierarchy, but I just gonna walk us through it briefly. So we have the prompts, like when you tell ChatGPT generate image for me, right? We have the prompt. We give it to the model to generate the outcome. And then behind the scene, actually, there is a lot of things going on. So Cloud, for example, they wrap our prompt in their own system prompt, custom instructions, which provide a huge bunch of guidance on what model can and cannot do, what can it say, what it cannot say, and that's basically the intention is to use it to safeguard the user, and also provide some sort of safety quality control over the response. And there's also the performance evaluation, and you would I guess intuitively think that this can be done automatically with automated evaluation systems, but frankly, with generative models, it's actually difficult to just do it right off the bat with automation. What happens in reality is that when we have a system to evaluate, like a home assistant or like different assistant, that has command, controls, response. So we actually need to assemble a team of people to evaluate the output manually first. And we will need to identify the point, the critical aspects or areas where we can automate. And there are areas where we cannot automate. And of course, the goal is to make this process as automated as possible so we can scale this up, right? That's why a human review process is involved in this whole evaluation process. And I believe that as over time, there are actually very different ways of evaluation. So I'll give you one simple example of how we actually automate this. Like when you do a task, when you perform a task, you can actually use a reasoning model or like a O1 or O4 mini to evaluate the response from the other models, give you a confidence level or score, or whatever of the sort. And then you can see, okay, how confident are you, or is the reasoning model of all these responses? And then you can evaluate them, rank them, however you like. And this is one way of using models as using models or LM as a judge as a baseline. So these are just a glimpse, I guess, of what are currently being done in the industry of what we can do today. And there are additional tricks. I guess I'll briefly touch the agentic workflow because it's sort of the big thing right now. So AI agents is actually very complicated in terms of how its output can be evaluated. So like operator, like the idea is we give the agent a task. It hands off itself and use bunch of tools, plans the task and use the tools that it can use, and it, iterate through this process and to reach the result. And this entire process is expected to be a handoff process. Like we can intercept, of course, but what's the point of this agents if we just keep intercepting it, right? So this brings a huge array of problems. As you can see, these long-running agents have just so many steps it can go wrong, and it just so many steps we can evaluate. And as planners, as humans, we'll probably know that when we try to plan a trip, when we try to plan, maybe a trip with our friends, go outside, we know that some different people will have different plans, right? And if you think about it, different models will have different plans. Same models for same task will have different plans. And that becomes a real difficult problem to evaluate in practice, and especially to evaluate at scale. So I won't go too much down into the details about how this can be actually evaluated. I think that's a whole separate lecture, and I think Sanji, if you're interested, I can share a bit more resources with the community afterwards on how this works and how you can apply this when you build your own project. Because although we will warrant, I guess, maybe 5 or 6 hours of a talk. So I try something simple. I'd like to ask every one of you draw a sketch of a working bicycle. As simple as it can be, but working bicycle, so includes all the components. And when you're done, you can just say +1 in the chat. Okay, anyone done yet? And I want to share your sketch. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Okay. I guess you're probably done already. About 2 minutes. I compare this with a actually functional bicycle. So, probably we have a rough idea of how the bicycle will look. When you actually look at how the functional pieces are, I can't see what they are drawing, so I can't really compare. But like, if you can compare this with what they are doing yourself, and to see if it's actually simplifying some components of the bicycles, some parts of it, if it's actually functional. And the premise is that our brain sometimes over-index on plausibility, and so AI models actually does the same thing. So it generates something that looks largely correct, but if you really deep dive into the functional logics, it's usually had some mistakes there. I will show in the previous example as well. Now, this is a short blob. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this. I'm just using this as I guess more than as one of the famous examples. There are two factual incorrectness in this paragraph. Can anyone tell me which facts are incorrect? And this will generate with AI. Okay, I guess we can walk through this. So it says in 1969, NASA Apollo 13 mission carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the lunar surface, where Armstrong famously declared, "That's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind." The samples returned showed that the moon's crust is made primarily of liquid water, overturning earlier ideas that it was smooth. Can anyone tell me any mistake you see in this paragraph? Okay, feel free to type in the chat. All right. I'm not sure if we can see about this chat, but Yeah, I guess there's one very difficult mistake here. It's hard to spot, but there's one very obvious error here. Yeah, exactly. The moon crust is not made of water. It's yeah, it's a rocky crust. There's very little trace of water or ice on the moon actually. But you can see there is certain level of mistake that can be observed in the output of AI, and it's an interesting fact. And the other less harder problem is it was Apollo 11 who carried Armstrong up there. So when we think actually, we will see lots of different thinking bias in ourselves. We have the confirmation bias, right? We have things that fit our beliefs. Like we believe in something, we will more likely to agree that it's true. Like anchoring bias and all of these mental bias of thinking logics, we actually observe them in large language models. There are actually interesting studies on this topic. And the way the techniques we use to make these models provide more accurate response, like a chain of thought, for example, is actually what we humans do for ourselves. Yeah, like we you doing your questions or solving your exams, you're probably being told that write out a thinking process, think out loud, all these things. What are those really? It's just explain your thinking process, right? Train your thoughts in humans, and we just transplanted this or migrate this over to the models, and yeah, it worked. Like the prompting techniques, right? All the prompt techniques to anchor the fact how it's a role, right? These are anchoring effects, explain provide context for models. That's what we do when we talk to other people, right? If the other person can understand what you are talking about, we better provide them with more, I would say, context, more information to make sure they have all they need to communicate, to continue the conversation, right? And that's why in addition to the origin of artificial intelligence, I think with the modern large language model today, we are increasingly seeing the application of behavioral psychology and cognitive psychology principles that are being actually applied to our interaction with large language models. And that's what makes this whole domain fascinating and I would say intriguing, because, well, 64 years ago, they're saying that models can think, AI can think, but today, literally, we have AIs that actually can pass Turing tests. That means people is having a hard time to distinguish models from humans. Well, so I see you all moving forward with this hackathon and continue coding with your programs. I would ask you to think about what model can do today and how you can actually apply the way you interact with others into your interaction with the model itself and see how it changes, how its behavior changes. Yeah, that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening. And let me know if you have any questions.